American art.
The debate over so-called net neutrality, the principle that all data on the internet should be treated equally, has been heating up. It comes after the FCC issued rules that would have prevented companies like Comcast and Verizon from charging the content providers they carry more for faster service. Those rules have been challenged in court. In response, President Obama has instructed the FCC to develop the strongest possible rules to protect net neutrality. If a content provider like Netflix, for example, is using more bandwidth, should it be charged more? Or would those extra charges for faster delivery to consumers threaten the open nature of the internet? Here to help guide us through this contentious debate are Colleen Connell, she's Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois, and Jim Blakely, Director of Communications for the Heartland Institute, a Chicago-based free market think tank, and welcome both to Chicago Tonight. Before we get into the pros and cons, first of all, I'd like to spend just a little time making sure that everyone understands what net neutrality is. Colleen Connell, why don't you take a crack at it first?
That's what we have now, Phil. We have an open internet in which everybody has equal access, like your introductory piece said, which means in practical terms that internet service providers, ISPs for short, can't block access to content that's legal, they can't slow or throttle access to content, and they can't really discriminate with respect to the speed at which you can download content. So what that means in practical terms for people is that a vertically integrated internet service provider like Comcast, which also owns NBC, can't make it slower for customers, consumers, to download WTTW and stream Chicago Tonight.
Thereby giving
NBC an advantage. That's exactly what it means. And we've had an open internet, or net neutrality, for really the 25 or so years that we've had the internet. And so when the president says he wants the FCC to promulgate rules that protect in the strongest possible terms net neutrality, he's protecting the right to all of us to communicate like we've all become accustomed to communicate. It's really,
you know what? That goes to the argument about it. Let's stick with the definition. So, Jim, historically, traffic on the internet has used the same lanes. There've been no express lanes for certain content that pays a toll so it can go on an express lane, if you want to think of it that way.
Right.
Anything to add in terms of the definition of what net neutrality is?
Well, we've had net neutrality, and it's been a kind of a gentleman's agreement on the web between customers, ISPs, and the people that provide the content that people consume on the internet. And it's because market forces have made it so that the kind of deal you're talking about, where Comcast would favor an NBC, its own property, over another network, there are market pressures. People would leave Comcast if they were discriminated against in that way, if their service was degraded. The internet, one of the great things about the internet are message boards and the communication people do. It is very easy to get very bad online press and comments on mistreating customers. And so there's all sorts of incentives for companies in the free market to serve their customers better, and of course the services that they also provide in their internet. So yeah, there's really no fast lane. The idea is that Netflix would pay more of toll because they're the 18-wheeler on that toll road. They're not the little car, and so because they're taking
up more of the bandwidth.
Yes.
But just again, sticking with understanding the basic definition, ending net neutrality would allow Verizon, Comcast, and other ISPs to provide faster service to companies that pay more. That's a fair characterization. It's like, okay, we're going to charge you a toll, and that toll allows you to get on an express lane.
I think that's a fair characterization.
Okay, well, why shouldn't let's get into the debate over whether it's a good thing or not. Colleen Connell, why shouldn't ISPs be able to charge the content providers they carry more if they're using more bandwidth? You know, tolls for 18-wheelers. A lot more than tolls for a subcom.
I think it really stems from what I said in my earlier comments. I think it really suppresses speech and expression. It makes it harder for the end-use consumer to actually have equal access to all legal content. And I think it's also very anti-competitive, Phil. I mean, just the example with YouTube and Google Video. So Google Video, developed its own video streaming service about the same time time that the two guys from the University of Illinois started developing YouTube. YouTube was a better product. And ultimately, as everybody knows, Google acquired YouTube for several $billion. Had we not had net neutrality, a big user like Google could have paid for the faster access and really crushed a mom and pop startup like YouTube. And so it's anti-competitive and it's anti-expression. And I think, again, we have all prospered by this wonderful engine of information that's become the internet.
Well, let's get Jim on this. How about the assertion that if net neutrality goes away, if companies can pay more to the internet service provider to get my content to you, the consumer, faster, that gives me an unfair advantage in a way that would stifle the little guy from creativity.
Well, it's funny thinking of YouTube as the little guy. They're a billion-dollar corporation now. They do start as a little guy. And when you're a little guy, you're so little that nobody cares about how much bandwidth you are using. I mean, Netflix, right now, tonight, people streaming this program and other things, this is peak usage.
And there are millions, I'm sure.
There are millions of people around the world streaming Chicago Tonight right now. And they are among, this is peak hour time for that kind of use. One half of all traffic going across the broadband networks in North America right now are from two sites, Netflix and Google's YouTube. That is an enormous amount of data that's going through, that's taking up, and everything else is the other half. So all these other little people are not being harmed by these two things, but it could happen soon. Netflix is going to charge, anybody pays, they pay Netflix because they want to see that streaming service, they want to see it uninterrupted. So Netflix has an incentive to get the fastest service they can get to their consumers. Having Netflix pay Comcast a fee to get, basically, the way to think of it is like, if Netflix is in Oak Park and they need to get to Chicago, there's two ways to do it. They can either rent a home in Chicago or they can take the train there every day. It's a lot easier for them to rent the home in Chicago. They're already there, and then their traffic, their content goes out. And so Netflix is either going to charge, people pay these fees. And so either people who subscribe to Netflix pay the extra for their fast service,
it'll be passed on to consumers.
But it's passed down to the consumers of Netflix, not the consumers of everybody. And if net neutrality is enforced by the federal government, where these kind of arrangements that are beneficial to everybody can't be made, we're all going to be paying those fees, and we're all going to have slower internet service because the efficiencies of the market won't be allowed to work.
How about that? If an arrangement isn't made to handle these bandwidth hogs like YouTube and like Netflix, will the rest of us be hurt ultimately?
No, I think that just the 20 years of experience that we have on the internet and how we've all benefited, just regular consumers, from the free flow of information to startup businesses like YouTube or various other startups, show that unrestricted equal access to all legal content on the internet is really the way to go. And I have grave concern about not having rules that actually enforce that open content, because the reason that the original rules that you referenced that were under challenge were set forth was because of complaints by, ironically, subscribers of Comcast, that Comcast had basically discriminated in the speed at which it allowed peer-to-peer users to download content. And we have numerous other examples where this gentleman's agreement hadn't worked very well. I mean, we have an example here from Chicago where providers...
Quick response to that, because some people have said this will create an era of digital discrimination. Your response?
Well, essentially, the case she's talking about is Comcast versus FCC, and what's ironic is that by the time that got to the D.C., or I presume that's the one you're talking about, there's many of cases like that, but by the time it got to the D.C. Circuit and got adjudicated, it was already the conflict between people that were using BitTorrent to bring movies into their computers was already settled. That conflict was already settled. The point being that government cannot make all these decisions, right? It can't make it any faster than consumers making their own decisions and putting market pressures on these firms can make. I mean, that was a problem that didn't need to be solved because it was already solved by the time the courts got it. And in fact, all of this discussion is about potential problems in the digital economy. The internet isn't broken. There is nothing to fix here. And so, let's wait until there are actual conflicts that seem to be very sticky, and then let's address them through other ways. I mean, the Federal Trade Commission can handle handle a lot of these things.
Okay,
You don't need the
Colleen
FCC.
Connell, is the internet broken? Are they attempting to fix something that isn't broken?
Well, no, the FCC is attempting to protect what we have. You know, the rules are governing net neutrality. They're saying we're going to protect net neutrality, which Jim has said is not really what they favor. They want to be able to have this pricing priorities, and the economics of it aren't the only issue here in squashing, you know, mom and pop startups. There's also a very serious issue of discrimination. So, in one of those cases came out of Chicago, where I believe it was AT&T censored the communications of the lead singer for Pearl Jam during a concert here in Chicago when he began to criticize the Bush administration. And AT&T basically blocked part of that concert that it said it was going to stream live because they didn't like the content of that communication.
How about
that's a risk?
Jim? How about the issue of impinging on people's freedom of speech and giving these internet service providers the ability to do that? And that'll have to be our last point.
Well, I imagine AT&T will not do that again, and they're not going to not do that. They're not going to try to block somebody from singing the way they want to sing, live streaming a concert, not because the government told them not to, but because the market and the consumers told them not to. They got a lot of bad press for that, and so there are already these incentives for free speech across the internet because there's pressures from all of us consumers to make sure we get what we paid for and get what we've expected over these last 2 decades of the digital revolution.
This debate will have to be continued at a later date. Colleen Connell, Jim Lately, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the insight.